So it's been a while since I spoke in church, and I just wanted to take the opportunity really to say thank you very much to everybody who's looked after our family and helped us out and provided meals and all kinds of things that have, looked after us. And it's been really lovely the way the community has kind of come around us. We'd not had the easiest time as a family, and about a year ago I sort of hit the wall, as my counsellor said. So so thank you very much. And I also wanted to say how encouraged I am about how things are going with church. Last weekend was a real high point for me, getting to baptise my daughter. That was just wonderful, and Linda, and watching people move on their journey, to use Linda's word, towards the Lord. That's been wonderful, very exciting. Not to mention the healings that we've seen recently, and the outreach that we did in the Derby Centre the week before. The week before last. That was great as well, being able to give out, I don't know how many chocolates Bob gave out on his own. That was quite impressive, but including to the security guard. Just great. It's just been going really well, and I'm really pleased with how things are going. So obviously I haven't done this in a while, and just to kind of ease myself into this, I thought I'd kind of answer the question, what the heck am I doing here? How do I come to find myself here on Sunday morning talking to you guys? And to answer that question, I'm going to need to go back a few years. I'm getting on a bit, but go back to when I'm doing my A-levels back in Preston. And we at that time were going to this Anglican church. My parents were taking me to this Anglican church, and it was it's quite an ugly building. And it was like the building that they forgot to finish. It was going to be a cathedral for Preston, but then they got halfway through it and stopped, or changed their minds, ran out of money or something. And they'd left the walls with the bricks hanging out so that they could continue the wall sometime in the future. But that had been decades before. So we were going to this place, and the reason we were going there was because the vicar had something about him. And he invited us to this Wimber conference. So they talked about it. We didn't really know what we were going to expect. But anyway, we found ourselves in Harrogate going to this conference, and there were 3,000 other people there. So John Wimber was the guy at the time. I think there's a photo of him. There he is. He was the guy at the time who was leading the Vineyard. He's died now, but... And I do want to talk a little bit about him this morning, but before we get into any kind of hero worship, he would just describe himself as a fat man going to heaven and nothing special, which was really kind of endearing. So we go to this conference, and it was during the week, and I was at sixth form, so I must have skived off, and that bit's a bit hazy in my mind, but I know it was very naughty, and nobody said anything. I don't recall there being any comeback or anything like that. So we go to this conference, and the format of the conference was quite different to anything that I'd experienced at all. It was very similar to what we do, which you're all quite used to, I think. But it was completely different. I was used to having a book that you read. You sang some songs from. You'd stand up, you sing a song. You sit down, somebody would say something. You stand up, you sit down. All that kind of thing. Whereas now we run the songs together. So just experiencing that for the first time was quite amazing. And singing in a congregation of 3,000, again, that was really, really something. And the songs were unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was just wonderful. And I think at that conference, I first experienced something that Linda described probably more eloquently than me. Linda, who was baptised last week, she talked about how at DTI, and I think there's a photograph of what DTI is like. So DTI is this Vineyard youth conference that we went to last year. A few thousand kids singing and worshipping, and just experiencing that and experiencing God's love in the middle of that, like a great big hug. I think I can't remember the word she used. It was something like, it was just overwhelming. I think that's what she said. And so there was this overwhelming sense of God's presence in the worship, and then Wimber would talk about something or other, I can't remember, and then the fun would really begin, because it was like heaven invaded earth. You'd see people just experiencing miracles. You just see miracles happening right in front of you, and it was a lot of fun. People who were really poorly weren't poorly anymore. The odd demon was coming out, and all that kind of thing. It was quite quite good. And he would teach us to pray for one another, and just like we've been doing. And they used to use the word awesome a lot, and it was really awesome. So, here I am, 16. Now, at that point, there weren't any other Vineyard churches in the UK. The feeling was that Wimber was here to help the other churches. And even at that conference, they had other people speaking from different streams. There was a fella called Francis McNaught, who was a Catholic guy, and there were other people, and that for me, just as an aside, has been really helpful on my journey with the Lord. To see what Wimber modelled, that we're just one flavour in the stew, we're nothing special. That has been really, really helpful. So at 16, I was hooked. I was hooked on this. I couldn't get enough of this stuff. But there weren't any church plants. So I didn't realise it at the time, but I guess deep down I probably knew this is what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And Wimber would talk about getting to do the stuff. And so I've got a little video clip, I guess we'll need the sound, of Wimber talking about that. Now, it's going back a few decades, and he's Californian, and, it's quite different to the northern fella who's standing in front of you now. So just be warned. But here he is.
As I read the New Testament, I fell in love with Jesus. Didn't you? I liked him. I liked what he was like. I liked the things he did. I liked the things he said. Didn't you like those things? I thought that stuff was hot. I liked it when he multiplied the bread. Did you like that one? Huh? How about it? Did you like that? And the fishes, the sardines. I always picture sardines. I like that stuff. I like all that stuff, I liked it when he went by the fig tree and said, and it died. Can you picture him doing that? I like all that stuff. I like it. I remember last night, come forth. That's a biggie, that's hot. There are not many guys doing that come forth thing, telling anybody to come up from the dead. I liked all that stuff. And when I became a Christian, I thought that's what I was going to do. I spent several weeks reading the New Testament and talking with these people, and I thought, this is great. I'm going to join up. I want to do this stuff. And so I remember the frustration of attending church the first few times. You know what I thought they did at church? Now, this is how stupid I was. I thought that people gathered at the church, had a good time together, sort of divvied up the land, and then everybody went out and healed a few and cast out a few demons and won a few people to Christ before lunch. And so the first few times I went to church, I went prepared with the idea that we're going to, I'm going to take Anaheim. I want to go to Anaheim, the deepest, darkest pagan Anaheim. Over there by Disneyland. That's where I want to go, because that's where I was raised. And when they didn't do it, I was disappointed. And I remember one day asking a guy about it. I said, when do we go out and do it? He said, what? I said, when do we go out and do it? He says, you don't have to do it. You just have to believe it was done once. Now that's pathetic. Isn't it? I found out over the next year or two that we cried about it, we sang about it, we preached about it, we prayed over it, we gave to it, but we never did it. We never got to go do the things that Jesus did. And I grew disillusioned in the process. Now, when I worked for the devil, he let me do his stuff. Didn't he let you do his stuff? He let me do his stuff. But when I came to work for Jesus, they didn't want to let me do his stuff. And to tell you the truth, I joined up to do the stuff. Did you? You see, it's doing the stuff that's going to change the world. It's not knowing it was done once. It's not knowing that it's important. It's doing it that's going to change the world. Somewhere, someplace, somebody's got to start believing this book and acting on it. And I figure it might as well be us. We're qualified. We can read and write, most of us. And we understand that it can be done.
So I saw this guy, really inspiring. It was great. And then I find myself at Birmingham, going to uni, studying civil engineering. And, there's kind of tension going on in my life. Here I am seeing these wonderful, exciting things. And there I am at Birmingham studying civil engineering. Now, civil engineering, you build things. That's why you get into it. You build things. And learning how to do it, well, the yellow pages. You remember the yellow pages? If you looked up civil engineering in yellow pages, it used to say, they changed it, but it used to say, C, boring. And that kind of summed it up for me at the time. There was one of the structures lecturer, Dr. Little. He would have his OHP, and he would have the window was over here, and he would walk from the OHP to the window, and then back. And I worked out how far he walked in a lecture, because there was nothing else to do. So you can kind of see this tension. So at that time, Birmingham Vineyard was just starting. There was a monthly service. I started going along to that. And sure enough, as soon as I graduated, I got myself a place working with Birmingham Vineyard. And in their services, it was just the same. We had the presence of God, and we saw miracles happen when we prayed for each other. Wimber was brilliant at using little phrases and being able to explain things. So that little phrase, doing the stuff, that really sums up a lot just in those few words. And somebody once asked him, "What's the Vineyard? What's the Vineyard Church?" And he drew on a napkin. He drew this thing called the Vineyard Man. I think we got a picture of it. It might be a little small for you to see it. Obviously, it's a bit better than on a napkin. But that kind of sums up who we are. So I just want to, just spend a few minutes just talking quickly about what we're doing, what is going on here. When you come on a Sunday morning, what is taking place. We are, like I said, one flavour in the stew. So, we can celebrate when other churches are doing well. Steve, the guy who runs this place, the older guy, he goes to St Mary's Catholic Church, and he told me at Easter there was standing room only. That's brilliant. That's fabulous that's the case. A couple of weeks ago when we didn't have a service, I went to the Solid Rock Parish Church around the corner, and I was the only white guy there. And it was very different to our style, but it was great. It was a party, and they were teaching the Bible, they were praying for each other, and at the end of it, they had a thing where people would come up and say what they were thankful for. Now, if I asked you guys to do that, maybe one brave soul would do that. They were queuing up, and they had a timer. The guy said, "You've got 60 seconds," and somebody would be pouring out their heart about something that God had done for them. The mic went off. Because this is the only way they could keep control. And then the MC fella, he said, right, just, everybody's finished now. I want to say something. And everybody was going, 60 seconds, 60 seconds. So anyway, it was a lot of fun, a proper party. And that's great. That's one of the things that Wimber imparted to us, so I can enjoy that, and I can enjoy going to a monastery and just sitting in silence with the monks. Anyway, we're just one flavour in the stew. So what we're doing here is making disciples and equipping the saints. That's what it talks about in the head. This is Jesus' church. At the end of Matthew's Gospel, he talks about the Great Commission. I think I've got that on the screen. So then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountains where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I'm with you to the very end of the age." And that word, therefore, when you see the word therefore, you have to wonder what it's there for. And what he's doing is he's summing up everything that he did before, all the miracles and all the teaching, and he's saying, this is what I want you to do. Make people who will, do these things, and baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, which is what we did last weekend. So, the two arms are church planting and development, and church development. So in the early days of the Vineyard, they had a picture of lights coming on across the world and those lights joining up. And the idea behind that was that we would do church planting as a Vineyard movement. If you think about Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, this was his method. This was his method of doing evangelism, of seeing change happen. He would go around and he would do church planting. There was that's impressive that you zoomed in. Thank you. There's a missionary who went to China in around the year 1900, and he said this. He said, "We want Paul's theology and his results, but not his methods." And at that time when he wrote that, it was almost prophetic. People weren't doing church planting, and it wasn't until like the 1960s people started to do church planting and take up Paul's method of doing things. Viv once said to me, "You guys are missionaries." Viv in the church, and she, and I'd never really thought of it like that, but I think in some ways we are a missionary organisation. Seeing people come to faith isn't something extra to what we do. It is absolutely core to what we do. It's right at the heart of it. So it's why we have a website so people can find us. It's why we moved here, because there's more space than there was across the road. It's why there's somebody welcoming you at the door, because that's really important. The first impression is is a really key thing. It's why we have tea and coffee. So when you come in, you've got something to do. What do you do with your hands? But if you've got a cup of tea, then you're busy and you're safe. It's not just because you didn't get time to have a tea and coffee before you left. It's actually there for the new person, so they feel comfortable. And it's why we put up signs. I once went to the gym at Pentagon Island. I won't say which one it is, but Jane got me a free pass. I went in the changing room, got changed. I couldn't find my way out. It was really embarrassing. And there's all these blokes who are in a state of undress, and I had to ask one of them, how do I get out of here? And it was really embarrassing. And what it is? And I've never been back, and I will never go back, So that's partly what we're trying to do here on a Sunday morning, is make it comfortable so that people could come and be relaxed and not feel, embarrassed. And the same thing goes on during the service. We try and explain what's going to happen, even though you guys all know, if you've been before, it's pretty much usually the same. The format. That's why Phil stood up at the beginning and said, "This is what is going to happen," so that people feel comfortable. And so that when you invite your friends, you know what they're going to get. You're not going to get somebody with I'm going to get in trouble here. You're not going to get somebody with a banner who's going to, smack the new person around the head or something like that. Or any tambourines, just in case. They did have a tambourine at the Solid Rock Church, but the pastor was playing it, so I couldn't do anything about that. Anyway, I'm in trouble now. So church planting is really key to the Vineyard. And when the first vineyards started, church planting wasn't really a thing. But now, if we were to try and move venue, on a Sunday morning, part of the problem would be that there are so many other church plants in Derby that they've taken up all the other venues. And that's great. You might look at at Christianity in the UK and think, maybe it's in decline. And maybe if you look at the established churches, maybe that is the case. But there are loads of new churches being planted and growing. And there'll come a point where the new churches, the increase in the new churches overtakes the decline in the established churches. And that's a really interesting point. I got that off a fellow called Pete Gregg. So just to fly through the last few things. In the body, we say that we're a hospital. So if you're here and you've had a tough time, you're very welcome. That's fine that you're here. And, we'll pray for you and be around you. And if life is tough, which it often is, and Jesus even said that, you'll have trouble, we'll pray for you. And that is part of who we are. We're a hospital. But obviously you don't go to a hospital to stay there. You go there to get better, hopefully. We also say we're a school. And just to mention again, the Vineyard Essentials course that's coming up. And it's why things are often quite practical with us. This is how you pray for people. This is how you do life. And we also say that we're a family. There are different people from different life stages here. And that's great. And that's exactly what we want, like a family. And by the way, that's how we, as Derby Vineyard, relate to the other vineyards, across the world. We relate as family. So we share the same DNA, but in the same way that Jane and I have our family and we relate to other families, that's the way that the Vineyard works as well. And there is a structure, there's overseers, area leaders, all that kind of thing, but they're not like bishops, we're peers. And unlike other organisations, we only give 5% to the Vineyard Central, Vineyard Churches it's called, just because they don't have many people working for them, and it's a very light structure. So in the same way that Jane and my family rises and falls on our own merit, so does Derby Vineyard. And it's down to us to make it happen. And it's just like that missionary said all those years ago, the best way to do it is to be, self-propagating, there we go, self-supporting, self-propagating and self-governing. And that's how we are. That's how we operate. There's no handouts coming from elsewhere. It's down to us. So just while we're talking about family business, we are our own charity. We report on our own to the Charity Commission, and there's some trustees, Viv and Carmel and Chris from the Milton Keynes Vineyard, and a friend of ours, Paul, who's a retired vineyard pastor. And we're our own charity. And while we're talking about family business, I just thought it's kind of the year end for our reporting, so I thought I'd just let you know where we're up to financially. So last year you gave really generously, £68,500. There we go. Yeah. So, 11 and a bit was gift aid. So that's just stunning that our gang, gave that amount of money. And if you think about it, maybe there's 70 adults in the church. If you think, well, that's almost 70,000 when it comes back on. That's almost 70,000. So it's like £1,000 each. And obviously not everybody's earning and that kind of thing. That really kind of gives you an impression that some people are giving really generously and really sacrificially to make that happen, which is just wonderful. And I'm very grateful for that. Just to say, last year it cost us about 62,000 to do what we do. And then we gave away about 6,000 to other things, including the 5% that goes to Vineyard churches. So that's where we're up to. And if you want to know anything more about the money, you can ask me, or Viv knows the figures really well. So if you want to know anything, let me know. Next year there's quite a significant difference between what we did last year and next year, in that across the road was free and here isn't. So that account, and a little bit of an increase for inflation, that accounts for what I think it'll be next year, about 72. Just to talk about giving a little bit, it's obvious that if you're called to follow Jesus, then part of the deal is that you'll need to, give your money. and we can't do it without money. We simply can't. And I heard this story about, you know how we had the baptism service. I heard this story about in the days of old, when the knights would go off on their crusades, they would be baptized before they went, just in case, you know, they met their end. But they would hold their sword as they were baptized, and they would hold it out of the water. So when they were baptized, it's almost like saying, you can have all of me, but you can't have this bit. And sometimes I wonder if we do that with our wallets. Not that we have wallets so much anymore, but, you know, with our phones or however we Apple Pay or whatever we pay for things with. And sometimes I wonder if we do that. But when we baptize people, the whole person goes under the water. In the Old Testament, they talked about giving 10% and giving a proportion of what you earn. And I think that's a really helpful kind of approach. You know, so if you get a pay rise, you still give the same proportion. If you get a pay cut, you do the same as well. So, you know, and working that way is just, I think, it's really helpful. And it's very clear that there's a. Oh, sorry, I was going to say something else. One of the very helpful ways that I've found as we've worked with this for years is that we started doing this right at the beginning. So, you know, 10% of not a lot wasn't a lot. And you could be tempted to think, well, you know, I've not got a lot, so I don't want to give. I'll wait until I've got more. But the trouble is, when you wait until you've got more, guess what? The bills are more, and you've got kids, and you know, all that kind of thing. And I've been really impressed with some of the guys who've started this when they're young. You know, some of the guys here started this when they're young, and it's not a lot, but you can tell it's already worked in. So if you never had it, you don't miss it. And that's a really good way of doing it. The Bible does talk about there being a blessing when you're generous. And that blessing isn't always financial. I'm not going to teach you that if you give money, you will get money. However, we have often found that things have gone very well for us financially that we wouldn't have expected. The house that we live in, you know, we got a very good deal on that. You know, cars that we've been given, you know, all that kind of thing. Things that don't break down that should break down, you know, that sort of thing. So there is a blessing in being generous. And as your pastor who wants to pastor you towards green grass, you know, good pasture, I would really encourage you to work this into your life, to be generous. Because there is a blessing in that. Even the fact of just being able to say that I helped do such and such, that's a blessing in itself. So, that's something that I'd encourage you to work towards. Just boring but important. We're updating the charity because it's, you know, legislation moves on and all that kind of thing. So I'll talk to you. But as part of that, we need to change the bank account. So I'll let you know about that if I need to. And then just to pass the last couple of things. In the body of the Vineyard Man, we say that we're an army. And we're an army of people, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And then the Vineyard stands on the Bible, just off the bottom. Sorry, I've done it out of sync. Yeah, there we go. The Bible stands on the Vineyard stands on the Bible, and we interpret the Bible. We interpret the Bible through the lens of the kingdom of God. That's how we work. And then the Vineyard stands on the two legs of worship and compassion. Worship is always, we see everything as worship. You know, we're doing our whole lives as worship of God. But we do have a special place for singing songs to God and expecting God's presence to come as we worship. And then the last thing is compassion. The Vineyard stands on the leg of compassion. And you can see how the kitchen project across the road, so we're redoing the kitchen, how that fits in with the whole thing, because that will be a compassion project.